So it is a chart to organize data divided into intervals. So the frequency table literally is more of like a numerical thing that you're looking at that shows you how many times something occurs, the frequency of something. So how often does something occur into an interval? A histogram is really a bar chart, but this has connected bars. And the reason the bars are connected is because our intervals go from one number to the next. They don't skip any values. Whereas a bar chart in history, or a bar chart that you might just use to look at, organizes data like how many people have blue eyes, or how many people have green eyes, or how many people have dogs versus cats versus hamsters versus rabbits. Where those bars aren't connected because the one doesn't have anything to do with the other. In our case, a histogram is a numerical set of data. So if it starts at 0 and goes to 10, then my next interval starts at 11 and maybe goes to 20 or 21. So the data, the bars are connected in a histogram, whereas in a bar graph or a bar chart, they are not. So we are going to be making a frequency table today. And then the frequency table is going to go directly into creating the histogram. So the frequency table is actually the work beyond or behind creating the histogram. So the first thing that we need to look at to create a frequency table is to find the range of the data. And then we also have to determine the number of classes. And the number of classes, a class is considered an interval. So how many bars are we going to have on the chart? That's called a class or an interval. Generally, we will use 5 unless otherwise directed. So we'll find the range of the data, the highest minus the lowest, and then we will determine the number of classes, which unless it says 6 or 7, we'll generally use 5. That'll tell you how many bars you have on your chart. So each class is considered a bar. The second one, we'll have to then calculate the class width. The class width is the range divided by the number of classes. So that means how wide is each interval? That's the class width. So it starts at what number, it goes to another number. You will always round up. Even if the number is 10.2, you're always going to round up to the next value. And that way I have then all of my numbers, bless you, falling within those classes. So step 3, we will make sure that we identify the upper and lower numbers, which you're actually using for step 1. And then we'll divide up our intervals. or we'll create our classes. So it seems like a long process, but it actually is not. So on the next page at the top, you have a list of golf scores from a tournament, and generally the Masters, the Open, any of those has multiple rounds of golf. So this is not just one round of golf, this is an entire tournament. So those scores are in the 200s. It says first for you to find the mean, median, standard deviation, and range. So just a little review using your calculator, see if you can plug that data in and find that information. Bless you. And you can round to 2 decimal places. Kushal, what do you have?
282.
So the range we will use to help us figure out the class of it. So if you look at the next part, it says create a frequency table using 6 classes. So this tells you how many classes to use. If it doesn't, use 5. So to create a frequency table, we're going to find the class width first. That's by taking the range, which we have as 23, and dividing it by the number of classes, which is 6. And then you're always rounding that number up. So 23 divided by 6 rounds up to 4. So it's really 3.83? 3.83. So that's going to round up to 4. So always round up to 4. So the next thing, we have to look and get the lowest and the highest number. Since you plug that all in your calculator, the calculator will show you the largest and smallest number, or you can just visually look. Which one is the highest number? Or look at your calculator. Julian, which one's the highest number? 296. So here's our upper limit. And Julian, what's the smallest number that's listed here? 273. So that's our lowest number. So we're going to make a frequency table, which is just a chart. In the chart, we're going to have the interval, the tally, and then the frequency. So we're literally going to keep track of how many numbers fall within our values. The first interval starts with the smallest number. Well, that was 273. Now here's the tricky part. It contains 4 numbers, including 273. That's the first number. So what would our interval go up to is if the class width is 4. So that means it has to include 4 numbers in its width. Odette?
273
She said 276. So when you're looking at that, you're saying, yeah, but the width, if I subtract those, is only 3. But when you subtract, you're not including or counting that first initial value. So if you actually count to yourself 273, 4, 5, 6, I have 4 numbers in that class, including the number 273. So my second class starts with then the next number, 277, because the previous one stopped at 276. Counting 277, what does that class go up to? Julia?
280.
Right, it goes up to 280. So there are really 4 numbers in that class width. That's what the class width is telling you. 4 numbers are in there. So then I would start at 281, go to 284, 285, up to 288. The last class should include the highest number. If it doesn't, you calculated something incorrectly. But I have 6 classes because it said create a frequency table using 6 classes. The class width of each of those is 4. Each class contains 4 numbers. I cannot speak clearly. 4 days of teaching, I can't talk anymore. So now you're going to go through your numbers and literally make tallies as to which interval they fall in. And if it helps you to make a physical chart here, feel free to do so. But the first number is 290. So I go to where you have 290, put yourself a little tick mark, and then move on to the next number. I go in order. It makes it a little easier. So then we have 280, 287, 285. So you're just putting little tick marks into the class that the number falls in. So I did the first column. So then go to the second column and do the same thing. So start at 277, put a little tick mark where 277 belongs. And then when you go to make your tally, you're adding for your frequency how many tallies you have. Questions? So we did the class width by taking the range, dividing it by the number of classes, 5 if it doesn't say. And then that number 4 tells you how many numbers are in the interval. So looking at the interval, including the 273 up to 276. So yes, the distance is only 3, but when you actually count, there are 4 numbers there. The last thing underneath asks you to then create the frequency, or use the frequency table to create the histogram. It says make sure to label the axes. So if you're looking, the x-axis has now 6 little kind of divisions equally divided to get our intervals. Unless the interval starts at 0, it does not connect to the y-axis. So the first interval was 273 to 276. So that tells me that the data between there is going to create a bar in my histogram. And then the next one, 277 to 280. This is just you using your chart above and labeling each one of these intervals, and there are going to be 6 of them. So look at your chart that you have created, take the intervals, and now list them into your frequency table or your histogram. and these represent golf scores. The y-axis would be the frequency. So if you look at the highest frequency, the second one went up to 5, so we need to make sure that we count up to 5. And those numbers represent the number of golfers. So 3 golfers scored in the interval of 273 to 276, something like that. And then literally you're drawing bars. So starting at 273 to 276, there were 2 golfers in that first category, or that first class. So you're going to make a bar that shows that there are 2 people in that class. The next bar is connected because 276, 277, they follow each other numerically. So the next class went up to 5. So you're drawing 6 bars, 6 intervals in your graph based off of the frequency that you have above. One connects to the other. There's no break in the graph. So when you see a frequency table or a histogram, the histogram is going to be labeled so you know what you're talking about. So if I organized all the data together, it would say this is a golf tournament. The information on the bottom represents the scores that the golfers receive. The tally, or the number of frequencies, represents the number of golfers that would be in that category or that interval. Questions? So if you flip one more time, I think there's just, a little bit left here, one last page. So this is called a distribution, or pretty much a picture of data, how it is organized. There are 4 different ways that data can be organized, and this will kind of tie us into the next couple of things that we talk about. So data can be skewed left. It can be skewed right. It could make a mound, or it could be uniform. So those are 4 different ways that we could have a graph, a histogram, 4 different ways it could be pictured. So I'm going to draw just a little picture instead of writing out the physical definition. So we'll say that this is my bar graph, or my histogram. When the data is skewed left, that means that the smaller amount of data is on the left. The largest amount of data is actually on the right. So skewed left, the lowest amount of data is on the left side. So then when it's skewed right, I have most of the data on the left side, the smaller amount of data on the right. So we're looking at this part right here. That's the part that's being skewed. So skewed left, the lower amount of data is on the left. Skewed right, the lower amount of data is on the right. What do you think a mound graph would look like? Ollie? Yeah, so most of it's going to be in the middle. So your highest part would be in the middle, and then it kind of symmetrically goes off from there. So it kind of looks like a nice little curve now. Uniform means that they're pretty much all the same. Maybe one's a little taller than the other, but they're pretty close to being the same height. So there's one last term underneath, and that's a relative frequency histogram. This uses percentages instead of frequency. So you would calculate the percentage instead of listing the frequency. So I'm just going to take you back. You don't have to flip your page. God bless you. So if I was doing a relative frequency, we would then calculate the percentage. So just to show you, if I was calculating a percentage, 1, 2, 3, 4, it looks like there's 16. Anybody have a calculator? What is 2 out of 16 to give me a percent? Julian? 4.5%. So then I would graph it using the percentage instead of using the frequency. Julian, how about 5 out of 16?
31.25. The first one should be 12.5.
Oh, 12.5, not 4. Thanks. So then your bars would have the frequency listed as a percentage instead of listed as a numerical value. And the percentages should all add up to 100 then. So I have a worksheet for you where you're going to create 2 frequency tables and 2 histograms. The frequency table goes with the histogram. And then on the back, you're going to use the same information but calculate the percentages from your table of values.
You're not supposed to.
Have a great day.
Thank you.